Welcome to This Week in Big Sky Basketball. I'm your host, Denise Thompson, and I am joined today by Coulter Nuanez of Skyline Sports. How are you doing today, Coulter?
Very well. You can see the beautiful trees in the background. It's a nice winter day here in Montana. Only about 25 degrees, but sunny, so we got to enjoy it.
Oh, well, I guess 25 isn't that bad if we're playing basketball indoors, so you got to
That's
get
right.
a few things. You know what? Let's just go ahead and get started. Right now, we have 6 women's teams that have a 500 or better overall record this season. You can tell that the talent across the board is good, but right along with that is the coaching in the Big Sky. What do you think is working for Big Sky women's basketball on the coaching front?
Well, I think that the fact that you have so many veteran coaches is a huge deal in the league. You talk about Wendy Schuler in her 20th season at Eastern Washington, Tricia Binford in year 16 at Montana State, John Newley, Seton Sobolewski, both in year 13 at Idaho State and Idaho, respectively. And I think even though Lori Payne is kind of new on the scene at NAU, she's a proven head coach, given her great successes she had at the Division II level before taking over that NAU team. And then Mike Petrino at Montana as well. I know he's in his first year as a head coach, but he's been around the league for a while too. So you have a bunch of coaches that know the league. And I think that the fact that there is a lot of really strong teams on the women's side is not a surprise, because last year the league was by and large really young. Montana State was the old team in the league. I think that's why they won 19 league games. They had 5 seniors. Pretty much everybody else in the league did not have a ton of seniors. And now there is a bunch of upperclassmen, particularly at Idaho State, Idaho, and Montana. And so I think that that's why you see those teams performing well, at least early on.
Yeah, talk about a team that's performing well. We touched on them a little bit last week, but the Southern Utah men, they did split the series with Eastern Washington this past weekend to drop their first league game. What are your thoughts on both games and just how that played out in the end?
Well, Eastern Washington has been they're sort of a mystery right now, right? Because they've only played they'd only played one league game, previously to the Southern Utah series, but that's a big test for Southern Utah as well. I know Southern Utah got off to the great start, 4-0, including sweeping Montana, which definitely gave them a lot of breathing room in the standings. But the game being early against Montana, I thought that was an interesting fold, because you have a pair of senior guards at Southern Utah in John Knight III and Dre Marine, who are such veterans, and those guys have played in a ton of Big Sky games. They're going against the Montana team in basically the second and third games of the season for the Grizzlies. And the Grizz play so many young guards, including a couple of freshmen who I think are really talented, who will be good players. But seniors versus freshmen, especially early on, I think are always going to get you the upper hand. And so Eastern Washington expected to be the league favorite coming into this, and they were voted as the preseason favorite. But we haven't got a lot of chances to watch them, particularly against league competition. So I think Eastern knocking off Southern Utah in the first game, an affirmation for what Shantae Leggins has going at Eastern. But also then Southern Utah coming back and scoring 99 on Eastern. I think that Shantae's probably working on some defense after giving up 99. But that was a fun game to watch, 99-95, up and down, and a lot of scoring. So, I think that we know the proven commodities on Eastern Washington. And now it's about who's going to rise up and be some of the newer faces there. Tanner Groves, to me, looks like one of the most improved players in the league. So I thought that was a really fun back and forth this last weekend. And I think that the fact that we have teams playing back-to-backs now, we're going to see a ton of splits like that. I think if you get a sweep, that's a huge deal. And so I think that last week, good on both sides for those teams to split that thing, because neither one really loses much ground.
Exactly. But talking about momentum and things that are going, the Idaho State women right now are the lone undefeated team in the Big Sky. Since in the past, let's say last year it was Montana State women who seemed to be at the top. Right now, Idaho State 8-0 in conference play. What would you say is the key to staying at the top for a team that has started off so well?
Well, Idaho State is going to continue to have an advantage as long as they continue to play games, because they've played more games than almost anybody. So they have that experience under their belts. I mean, I think they've played 11 games, which is more than a lot of teams in the league right now, and then 8 conference games already too. So I think that they'll continue to build strength as long as they can continue to hit the court. But the thing is, Seton Sobolewski's teams have always been so good defensively. They're always going to be one of, if not the most physical teams in the league. They're always going to be one of, if the best rebounding teams in the league. But this Idaho State team's a little different because they can score the ball too. And I think that that's been a huge area of growth. We talked about Kanote last week, but I think that her development and the fact that she went from, really explosive athlete that maybe was a little bit sporadic at times to now a really consistent and dominant floor general. That's huge. You know, Callie Bourne being a year older, Dora Goles being a year older, and then getting Estefania Orrs back. I mean, all those factors. I mean, they have 4 all-conference caliber players. So if they can continue to just make sure that they get the games in, I expect them to continue to lead the pack.
Absolutely. But speaking of leading the pack, right now, the Montana State men have had 3 players earn Player of the Week honors. You know, like I said, they were hit a little bit as far as not being able to get all their games in, but they seem to be getting their feet under themselves, catching that rhythm. You know, are the Bobcats getting into groove at the right time?
Well, it's going to be an interesting test coming up. I think that NAU is an interesting team on the men's side because in the second year under Shane Burke are really young. I know since Jack Murphy left that job to go to Arizona, they've had a ton of roster overturn. And the first game against Montana last weekend, that when NAU was in Missoula, they looked like a completely young team that was not really ready for the moment. But the amount that they grew just in one game to then knock off the Grizz, I thought it was impressive. And I think that they do have some really talented young guys. So that'll be a big test for Montana State as they go on the road. But earning back-to-back sweeps like the Bobcats did, I mean, they're the first team to go back-to-back weekends with sweeps. So that definitely gives them breathing room. I know Southern Utah started 4-0, but there was a couple weeks in between their games. So 4-0 for the Cats is a good thing. And I think that the Cats are going to give a lot of teams in the league trouble because they're completely different than almost anybody in the league personnel-wise. They have these 2 incredibly explosive guards in Xavier Bishop and Ahmed Adamu who just attack the rim relentlessly. And what those guys maybe give up in shooting, they're so good at facilitating and driving and kicking. And then they have a couple of knockdown shooters, especially the freshman Tyler Patterson, who I think is definitely at least in the race for freshman of the year so far early on here. And then I think that they have a great weapon in Abdul Muhammad. He's a grad transfer from North Texas, and he's a guy that doesn't need the ball to produce. He's been a really, really good perimeter defender. He's about 6'9", but he can guard on the wing, and I think that really gives them a unique weapon. And then they're one of the only teams in the league, too, that not only has athletic guards, but also has not just functional, but sometimes dominant bigs. And, I mean, Jabril Bello is the real deal. He's the reigning Big Sky Conference Player of the Week. I thought that not just his scoring, which his scoring was great, and that was what got him all league honors last year, but his development defensively and on the glass is so big, too. I mean, he blocked probably 4 shots against Portland State that completely negated Portland State's fast breaks. And, his ability to just eat up rebounds too. I mean, that's how you secure stops. So I think that Montana State, they have as many elements as anybody in the league. They have good guards, good bigs, and some shooters as well. So I think they're going to be a tough matchup for most teams in the league.
Well, there you have it. We've talked a little bit about Idaho State, Southern Utah, Eastern Washington, Montana State, so many. Up next right now, we have Mary Louise Cook, who will break down the Big Sky Players of the Week, and then we'll be back. Stay tuned, fans.
Thanks, Denise. On the women's side, we saw senior guard Liz Graves of Southern Utah earn the honor for the second time this season. In her first of 2 games against UT Rio Grande Valley last week, Graves scored 33 points and grabbed 12 rebounds. She also dished out 2 assists and had 4 steals in the game. That performance is the second best for most points scored in a game this season, only coming shy of her season high by 1 point. She's now the conference's leading scorer, averaging 19 points per game this season. On the men's side, we saw Jabril Bello of Montana State earn the award. The junior forward posted back-to-back double-doubles to guide his team to a sweep over Portland State last week. Over the course of the series, Bello went 7 of 9 from the field, had 3 steals, 4 assists, and made 11 of his 16 free throw attempts. Back to you, Denise.
Thank you, Mary Louise, for showcasing our Players of the Week. Right now, our first question in this next segment is going to be, so Coulter, what team's bench do you think stood out the most this week on the men's side? Can't hear you, Coulter.
The mute. We talked in the first segment about the Montana State men, and I talked about their great guards that start in Xavier Bishop and Ahmed Adamu, but I think that they actually have one of the best reserve guards in the league as well in Mike Hood. He scored 19 points against Portland State last Thursday, and that was a big boost. The other team in the league that I think has a great bench, because Travis DeCuire has been working on his rotations so often at Montana, it's not. They haven't really decided who's on the bench and who's in the starting lineup. They have 9 new players on their roster, so it's kind of in flux. So sometimes guys like Robbie Beasley or Josh Vasquez or even Derek Carter Hollinger, who was the freshman of the year in the league last year. Those guys are coming off the bench sometimes. So I think that diversity really gives Montana some room to stand. And I think that's the Grizz are such an interesting team right now because they're 2-4, but their 4 league losses have all come by 4 points or less. They have a pair of 1-point losses and a 2-point loss at the buzzer. And so I think that they're knocking on the door with a young team. So we'll see where they turn. The other one you got to mention is Eastern Washington. I know that Ellis Magnuson has really struggled with some injuries, or he's just been in and out of the lineup as he tries to get healthy. But he was a guy that was, I think, the league's leader in assists last year as a freshman. And so you expect once he gets back to full health to really contribute for the Eastern Washington men. On the women's side, I think that Montana State is actually in a similar boat as the Grizz men because Montana State has 6 freshmen on their roster, including 5 that are playing and 4 that are heavily in the rotation as well. So they've gotten great minutes from Leah Beatty and Ava Ranson and Taylor Jansen. So they're playing. Trisha Binford's playing a lot. It's funny that Binford went from the oldest team in the league to the youngest team in the league. But she's doing a great job with those young players. And I think as they continue to develop, that's going to be a dangerous portion to watch in the league slate. And the last one I know that John Newley has been moving Gabby Harrington in and out of the starting lineup. She came off the bench 2 weekends ago. She was into the starting lineup this last week. If she remains a bench player or if she plays most of the time off of the bench, she's going to be one of the best bench players in the league too, and that's going to make Idaho's bench really strong as well.
You mentioned it earlier about defensive performances and block shots and everything. Just in general in sports, we always tend to look at the offensive side of things. But in your opinion, who was the top women's defensive player this past week?
Well, one young lady that has really impressed me this year, and I thought she was phenomenal the first time I saw her at the Big Sky tournament as a freshman 2 years ago, is Reagan Shank at NAU, at Northern Arizona. She was a great player as a true freshman. And then last year, she kind of had to take a reserve role because Caitlin Malvar came in and was an all Big Sky point guard at NAU. And now with Malvar opting out of this season, Shank is back in. And I know they play her on the ball sometimes, off the ball sometimes, but she's just a ball of energy. I mean, she does all the little things. She's great on ball defensively, but she's also, she's probably only about 5'8", 5'9", and she's definitely the best rebounding guard in the league. She's averaging 8 rebounds a game, and she's had multiple double-digit rebounding games. So I think that as far as doing the little things, doing the dirty work, she's definitely one to watch for sure.
What about on the men's side?
On the men's side, Bello has done such a great job of improving his rebounding at Montana State, and I think that's how you secure stops, to be sure. I think that Portland State has several guys that have really acclimated to Barrett Peary's haphazard style. I know that Portland State's only 1-3 in conference, but they're a team that nobody wants to play because they're going to press you from start to finish. They crash the offensive glass better than probably anybody in the country, and they have a couple guys that are just unbelievably talented. I mean, like Khalid Thomas, he's a 6'10" guy who can play on the wing. And so I think that because they have so many new faces, so many new players, they didn't return a single starter from last year. And then they had so many challenges early on with all the COVID stuff, not being able to practice. And I just think that Portland State is a ways away still from clicking. But when they do, I think that they're going to be a team that gives a lot of other teams in the Big Sky problems. And it's going to start with their defense. So I got to say that their entire team, I think, is one that could be a threat defensively.
What team do you think had the best overall performance this past weekend, whether that was a series sweep or just what you saw out of them, whether it was a close game?
Well, I think that Montana State getting their second straight sweep was huge on the men's side. But I also think that just splitting for Southern Utah was big, just from a confidence perspective, because Southern Utah is such an interesting team. Todd Simon, his guys, they play with a chip on their shoulder. I think that he likes to have that me against the world attitude amongst his guys. I think that's why they've wreaked so much havoc in the tournament the last couple of years, because they're ready to go. They're not scared. They played the 2 seed twice in the last couple of years and knocked them out and beat them handily. So, but I do think that there was a little bit of, I don't want to say skepticism, but people were thinking, okay, well, they beat the Grizz to open up conference play, but that was the second and third games of the year. What has Southern Utah really got? And they have a long break. They get a couple more. But how does Southern Utah really stack up with the best in the league? And so to lose to Eastern Washington and then come back and earn the split, I think that that's big. I think that that's really big for Southern Utah's confidence. And, on the flip side of that, I thought Montana had an inside track of getting a sweep. They led by 27 points against Northern Arizona in their win on Thursday. Then they led by another 17 on Saturday. And it looked like at times a young team finally figured out what Coach DeCuire wanted.
Mm-hmm.
To end that game, though, without scoring for 6 minutes, it could be a confidence hit to the Grizz. But I think that they're knocking on the door. They're right there. And I think once they break through that door, they're going to be a real threat too. But I think that right now the league is fascinating because I think the league is wide open, especially because you have so many young teams that are getting close, namely Montana and Northern Arizona.
What about for the women?
Well, the women's side, to have 4 consecutive sweeps for Idaho State, I mean, that just gives you so much breathing room. I mean, they could honestly almost probably cruise to a top 4 seed at this point, but I know they won't. But just the fact that they've already gotten 8 games in and they already are almost 2/3 of the way there to that required number of games to get to the tournament, that's big. And so they're in control. I'm so interested on the women's side to see things sort out because we've seen a couple cancellations on the Southern Utah women's side. So we really don't know about Southern Utah, but that also then affected the Montana schools too, because they didn't get to play those games. So the Lady Grizz and the Bobcats are both short a couple games. They're sitting there at 2-2 in league. They could have 1 or 2 extra wins, or maybe not. Maybe Southern Utah has a couple wins over the Montana schools too. So I think that we still have a lot to be determined on the women's side. Eastern Washington's women seem to be much improved, sitting there at 4-4. 4-2. Northern Arizona, I think, is another team where I think they have a lot of room to grow because they did have some players opt out. They have new faces in the program. Karika Rashid hasn't been able to get healthy yet, but I think she will. And so now all of a sudden, if you add her and Reagan Shankin continues to progress, you have a lot of pieces that are still coming together. So I think that this is going to be a work in progress. I don't think we're going to have a true evaluation on either the men or women's side for at least another couple weekends. But I'm dang glad that we're playing basketball and we have something to follow and watch.
Well, I mean, isn't that Big Sky basketball? Sometimes you just don't know until the final 2 weekends or last weekend, and even then, everything still might be up for grabs. So I think that's what makes it so exciting, right? That March Madness time and everything else we have, especially going back to Boise. I think we have a lot of Big Sky basketball to look forward to in the coming weeks. So I know that will be great. Mary Louise Cook is about to break down our standings for this week as we head into the weekend. So thank you very much, Colter. It's always appreciated to have you on.
My pleasure. Talk to you soon.
On the women's side, we did not see a change in the conference rankings. Idaho State continues to lead the standings as the team with the longest win streak in the conference. They've won their last 9 games and remain undefeated in conference play with an 8-0 record. Idaho and Eastern Washington are continuing to fight it out for second place in the standings as both teams currently have 2 losses. The Eagles were unable to play last week due to COVID testing protocols, while the Vandals were handed their second conference loss by the Bears of Northern Colorado. Although the Vandals and Bears split the 2-game series, the first game was one of UNC's best performances of the season, with the Bears having dominated the paint, outscoring Idaho 26-12. On the men's side, we now see that Montana State leads the conference after sweeping Portland State at home. They are the only team undefeated in league play. The Bobcats' 7-3 season start is the best since the 1997-1998 season. Northern Colorado also secured a series sweep over the Vandals of Idaho. Matt Johnson II guided the Bears, averaging 18 points, 2.5 rebounds, and 2 assists. After going 25 days without a game due to COVID protocols, the Eagles of Eastern Washington were finally able to take the court again. With not a single lead change, the Eagles ended Southern Utah's 9-game win streak with a 12-point win on Thursday. The Eagles ultimately split the series with the T-Birds after falling by 5 points in their second game. Now, know that you can catch all the Big Sky basketball home games for free on Pluto TV. Until next week, let's keep the conversation going on social media. Be sure to give @BigSkyConf a follow on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And if you're looking for around-the-clock information on Big Sky basketball, be sure to follow @BigSkyWBB and @BigSkyNBB. Thanks for joining us for this week in Big Sky basketball. We'll see you right back here next week.